On my birthday, my family gave me a surprise envelope. Inside were adoption papers. My sister laughed. See, I'm the real daughter. My father said, now we can finally be honest. I quietly stood up and said, then take a look at this. The moment they read it, the room fell silent. On a weekend morning, as Chicago's spring sunlight filtered between the skyscrapers, Emily Carter was brewing coffee in her apartment kitchen while staring at a date circled on her calendar, her 30th birthday, and finally, she would be returning home after 3 years away. Outside the window, winds from the lake rustled the fresh green trees, heralding spring's arrival. Chicago had been her refuge, a place to rebuild herself. After college graduation, she had built a new life in the city, far from her small Pennsylvania hometown. Her career at the accounting firm was going well. Last month, she'd secured a promotion to senior accountant. Her colleagues respected her, and life in Chicago was fulfilling. However, when it came to going home, she always felt an invisible weight settle on her chest. Emily, there's a special surprise this year, so make sure you come home for your birthday. The words from her mother Margaret's phone call last week kept repeating in her head. Her mother's voice had an unusual excitement in it. Usually, these calls just conveyed family news in a matter-of-fact manner, but this time was different. Emily sighed deeply, gazing at the steam rising from her coffee cup. Memories of home surfaced and faded in succession. Her father, Thomas, owned the town's long-standing pharmacy. Locals trusted him, saying, "You can go to Mr. Carter for advice about anything." But at home, he was always strict with Emily, sometimes even cold. Her mother, Margaret, a former high school teacher, now devoted herself to community volunteer work. Though gentle and kind-hearted, she was always obedient in Thomas's presence, never opposing his decisions. And her sister, Lauren, worked at a local real estate company. Since childhood, she had been her father's favorite, receiving expensive birthday presents and designer items. Even now, she made no effort to hide her sense of superiority over Emily. "You're the older sister, so you need to be patient. Lauren is still little." These were phrases Emily heard often as a child. With each sacrifice forced upon her for her sister's sake, she began to question her own worth. Taking a sip of coffee, Emily picked up her smartphone. The screen displayed a photo of herself taken last week, dressed in a polished suit with a confident expression. In Chicago, Emily was a successful career woman and an independent individual. But back home, would she revert to being the patient older sister again? Especially with her sister Lauren, their rivalry had intensified into adulthood, always trying to outdo each other with success stories at family gatherings. Lauren would accuse Emily of putting on elite airs and point out her flaws in front of their parents. Whenever this happened, Emily would make a habit of excusing herself early and leaving the family home. While folding clothes into her suitcase, Emily pondered the meaning of special surprise. Would her parents suddenly acknowledge her achievements and express pride? Or was it just her mother's exaggeration, with nothing more than an ordinary birthday cake awaiting her? Either way, she had decided to approach this visit differently. No more getting hurt, no more expectations, just a firm awareness that she controlled her own life as she returned home. After packing her last items, Emily locked her apartment door. Taking a deep breath, she headed to the airport. This year might actually be a special birthday, she thought, as she left Chicago behind. When Emily arrived in the small Pennsylvania town, she felt nostalgia mixed with anxiety welling up inside her. Through the taxi window, familiar sights from her childhood rolled by: the old street lamps on Main Street, the town hall clock tower, and the brick building of her father's Carter pharmacy. She smiled quietly at how the town seemed frozen in time. As the taxi stopped in front of the family home, Margaret was standing at the entrance. Her mother, with more white hair now, spread her arms wide upon seeing Emily. "Emily, you've finally come home." As Emily surrendered to her mother's embrace, she caught the familiar scent, cinnamon and vanilla, her mother's favorite perfume. "Where's Dad?" Emily asked, and Margaret's expression clouded slightly. "At the pharmacy. It's Wednesday, so he won't be back until evening." Emily said nothing more. She hadn't expected Thomas to leave work early for her arrival. Entering the living room, the same furniture arrangement and family photos on the wall greeted her as 3 years ago. But looking closer, she noticed new photos had been added. Lauren closing a real estate deal, golfing with their father, and last year's Christmas family photo. Emily wasn't in any of them. "Let's put your things in your room and rest a bit. We'll wait for Lauren before dinner," Margaret said. Emily nodded silently and headed upstairs to her room. Opening the door, her high school room welcomed her unchanged. The trophies and certificates she'd earned in college were packed away in boxes in the closet. Meanwhile, the walls displayed photos of Lauren's high school days and childhood pictures of the two sisters together. Sitting on the bed with a deep sigh, Emily took out her smartphone and sent a quick message to a colleague. Arrived safely. Already being treated as second best. Time passed slowly, and as the sky turned sunset-colored, the front door opened. "I'm home." Lauren's cheerful voice echoed through the house, followed by Thomas's deeper tones. Apparently, her father had closed the pharmacy early to pick up Lauren. Emily quietly descended the stairs and entered the living room. "Sis, it's been ages." Lauren rushed over with a radiant smile and gave her a light hug. She was still beautiful and sophisticated, with an expensive designer bag over her shoulder and a new ring glittering on her finger. Emily, Thomas simply called her name without any further welcome. He looked tired as he sank into his leather chair. "Now that everyone's here, let's have dinner," Margaret said brightly. The family gathered around the dining table looked, at first glance, like an ideal family scene. However, the conversation naturally revolved around Thomas and Lauren. "So, how was the new client?" Thomas asked Lauren. Lauren smiled proudly. "Perfect. The house on Baker Street. Contract signing tomorrow. That meets my quota for the month." "That's my girl," Thomas beamed. "Let's toast to that." He poured wine and raised his glass high. To Lauren's success. Emily silently clinked her glass, invisible to her father's eyes. She waited for a chance to share her own success. She had rehearsed her promotion story many times in her mind. "Actually, I got promoted last month," Emily said when finally addressed. "I'm now a senior accountant. Is that so?" Thomas said dismissively. "I suppose things like that come easy in the big city, but that's because you're in the city." "It must be easier there," Lauren chimed in after her father. "In a small town like ours, we have fewer connections, so it's much harder." Emily silently stared at her plate. She no longer had the energy to explain that her promotion resulted from months of overtime and hard work. "Emily, tomorrow is your birthday." Margaret changed the subject. "We've prepared a special surprise for you." "Yes, a truly special one," Lauren added with a strange smile. There was sarcasm in her tone that made Emily uneasy. "What kind of surprise?" Emily asked, and her parents exchanged glances. "You'll find out tomorrow," Margaret smiled, but her eyes weren't smiling. After dinner, Emily helped clean up the kitchen while her mother updated her on the small town's news. Old friends' whereabouts, newly opened stores, closed businesses. Amid such pleasant conversation, laughter from Thomas and Lauren could be heard from the living room. That night, Emily rested in her room but couldn't fall asleep. As she gazed out the window, longing for her Chicago apartment, she heard soft noises from the hallway. Emily quietly opened her door and listened. The voices of her father and sister whispering came from downstairs. "Are we really telling Emily about that tomorrow? Does it have to be now?" Lauren's voice was filled with anxiety. "It's time. We can't keep it secret any longer. Tomorrow morning, we'll tell her with the whole family present." Thomas's voice was filled with determination. Emily held her breath. What were they hiding? Had they kept some secret about her for years? Though disturbed by the ominous conversation, the feeling of having something hidden from her wasn't new to Emily. Back in bed, various possibilities emerged and vanished in her mind. Had her father's business failed? Was her mother sick? In the moonlight streaming through the window, Emily prepared to face her birthday with a complex mixture of anxiety and expectation. The next morning, Emily woke feeling strangely calm. Morning sunlight gently illuminated her room, making the curtains sway slightly. The clock showed 7, birthday morning. She took a deep breath and got out of bed. After showering, fixing her hair, and putting on a pale blue dress from her suitcase, Emily finished her makeup and prepared herself mentally while looking at her reflection. Whatever happened, she wouldn't be hurt anymore. From downstairs came the sounds of dishes and quiet conversation. Emily descended the stairs silently and headed for the kitchen. There stood Margaret, preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Mum." Margaret turned around, her expression momentarily tense before she hurriedly smiled. "Emily, good morning." "Happy birthday." Her voice trembled. On the table were freshly baked cranberry muffins and coffee, Emily's favorites. "Thank you," Emily smiled back. "Where are Dad and Lauren?" "In the living room. Since today is special, we need to talk." "All of us," Margaret said, averting her gaze. Emily nodded silently and reached for a muffin. The taste of her mother's homemade recipe spread nostalgically in her chest. Years ago, birthday mornings were always special: cake and presents, balloons and smiles, happy times. But after adolescence, birthday celebrations became somewhat perfunctory. "Come to the living room when you're ready," Margaret said quietly, before leaving the kitchen. Emily finished her muffin slowly and took a sip of coffee. Anxiety swirled deep inside her, but she tried to keep it from showing on her face. She wiped her mouth with a napkin, placed her coffee cup on the table, and slowly headed for the living room. With a tense expression, Emily entered the living room through the heavy door. Already seated were her father, Thomas, mother, Margaret, and sister, Lauren. Everyone wore strangely tense expressions, and a heavy atmosphere hung in the room. "Emily, sit down," her father, Thomas, commanded. "We have something to tell you." Emily quietly sat on the sofa, feeling her heart race. On the table lay a single envelope. The cream-colored, old envelope had yellowed slightly with time. "First, happy birthday," Thomas said formally. His voice was higher than usual, betraying his nervousness. "Today is a special day. It's time we told you the truth." Lauren sat in the corner of the sofa, wringing her hands in her lap. Despite her usual smug expression, she also seemed somewhat anxious. Margaret sat beside her husband, occasionally dabbing the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. Emily tried to remain calm as she looked at each family member's face. "What truth?" Thomas slowly picked up the envelope and handed it to Emily. "Open this," he said, his voice carrying a strange sense of relief, as if setting down a long-carried burden. Emily received the envelope with trembling hands. Nothing was written on the surface. When she opened the seal and pulled out a document, the words "adoption certificate" jumped out at her, showing her name and birth date. "What is this?" Emily gasped, feeling her mind go blank. "Yes, you're not our biological child," Margaret said in a small voice. Tears welled in her eyes. "We adopted you when you were 3 months old." Lauren displayed a triumphant smile, declaring, "See, I'm the real daughter. You're just an extra." Her voice mixed long-standing jealousy with superiority. Thomas continued, "Now the weight is off my shoulders. No more lies." He showed a relieved expression as he sat back deeply in his chair. Emily stared at the adoption certificate, speechless. Various emotions swirled inside her: shock, sadness, anger, and a strange sense of release. So this was why her father had always been cold toward her. She was always second best because she wasn't his biological child. "Why didn't you tell me until now?" Emily finally managed to say. "We thought you'd be hurt." Thomas shrugged. "Besides, after Lauren was born, we didn't think it necessary anymore." "Not necessary?" Emily's voice shook. "I had a right to know." "Oh, sis," Lauren said in a sickeningly sweet voice. "Don't get so upset. You're still part of this family, just not the real thing." At that moment, a memory from last week flashed vividly in Emily's mind. When she was organizing her mother Margaret's desk drawer, she had found another envelope. At the time, she hadn't paid much attention and returned it. But now, she understood the significance of what was in that envelope. Emily quietly stood up and said, "Then what about this?" She pulled another envelope from her handbag. It was identical to the one she had found in her mother's desk last week, a Pennsylvania University Hospital envelope. At that moment, the room's atmosphere froze, and the blood drained from Thomas's face. Margaret let out a small cry, and Lauren looked at her parents with a confused expression. "This is..." "Where did you?" Thomas's voice trembled. "I found it while organizing Mum's desk last week," Emily said quietly. "I didn't look inside at the time, but today I became curious." Emily took papers from the envelope and spread them on the table. They were letters exchanged between her father, Thomas, and a woman before Lauren was born, along with DNA test results for Thomas and Lauren. The results were clear. Lauren had Thomas's blood, but she wasn't Margaret's child. "Dad, this woman is named Linda Morrison, someone you met while traveling for the pharmacy. And according to these DNA test results, Lauren is the child of you and this woman, not Mom." Emily's voice remained calm. "How? Why did you?" Thomas stammered. His face turned pale, and his hands shook. "You didn't know, Mom?" Emily turned to Margaret. Margaret stared at Thomas with a pained expression. Her eyes reflected over 30 years of suffering and resignation. "No, it's a lie," Lauren shouted. Her voice had become shrill. "This must be fake." Emily calmly continued. "The test results bear Dr. Morrison's signature. He's the doctor you trust most, Dad." It can't be fake. A heavy silence fell over the living room. Morning light illuminated the 2 envelopes on the table. 2 secrets, 2 lives. Emily looked into her mother's eyes. There was indescribable pain there, but also a strange sense of release. "Mom," Emily called out softly. Margaret slowly stood up and approached her daughter. "Emily," she touched Emily's face with trembling hands. "You are my daughter, even without blood ties. You're my precious daughter." At those words, tears spilled from Emily's eyes, a truth hidden for 32 years. And now, the moment when everything was revealed, a heavy silence hung in the living room. Thomas held his head in his hands, sinking deep into his chair. He looked as if he'd aged 10 years overnight. Margaret wept, clutching her handkerchief with trembling hands. Only Lauren desperately continued to deny reality. "This is a lie. It's fabricated." "Dad, say something," Lauren cried. Her voice shook with anger and fear. "This isn't true. I am. But Thomas remained silent. That silence told the whole story. The truth was clear. The 2 pieces of evidence spread on the table, Emily's adoption certificate and the secret of Lauren's birth, were now undeniable realities. Emily stood by the window, gazing outside. Pennsylvania's morning light illuminated the trees, and the wind rustled the leaves. It seemed strange that the everyday landscape remained unchanged while inside. Her everything was falling apart. "You've been lying to me for 32 years, Emily said quietly. She turned to face her family and continued in a surprisingly calm voice. "You kept my adoption a secret until today, and you've treated Lauren like your biological daughter when, in fact, she isn't Mum's child. It's not a lie." Lauren shook her head violently. "Mum, tell me I am your daughter, aren't I?" Margaret looked sadly at her daughter. "Lauren, I've loved you like my own daughter, but I wasn't born from you." Lauren's voice trembled. Her eyes reflected deep sadness alongside anger. Thomas finally spoke. "Back then, Margaret and I desperately wanted children, but doctors said it would be difficult for her to have children. That's when we had the opportunity to adopt a baby, and that was you." He looked at Emily. There was, for the first time, a frankness in his eyes. "And you hid the fact that I was adopted. Why?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "We were afraid of losing you. We thought you might look for your real parents," Thomas faltered. "Besides, after we took you in, my relationship with Margaret grew cold. But then I was born 4 years later. Like a miracle," Lauren interjected. There was still hope in her voice, a desperate wish to deny the truth. "No," Margaret said quietly. She slowly stood up and approached the family photos displayed on the living room mantel. "Lauren, you are." "Thomas was having an affair during his business trip," Margaret confessed tearfully. Her voice was heavy with over 30 years of suffering. With a nurse named Linda Morrison, she said she was pregnant. The townspeople knew nothing. To protect the town's reputation, we pretended I was pregnant and agreed to take in the child when it was born. "No way." Lauren stared at her mother with a pale face. "So both Emily and I, neither of us are your real children." "Lauren, you have Thomas's blood, but you're not my child," Margaret said painfully. Tears overflowed from her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. "Lies. I'm Mom and Dad's child." "I don't believe this," Lauren shouted, suddenly standing up and rushing out of the room. The sound of the front door slamming shut echoed throughout the house. The 3 remaining family members were left in silence. Only the ticking of the old wall clock resonated in the heavy atmosphere. "Why did you tell me about the adoption today?" Emily asked. "It couldn't have been mere coincidence to make such a revelation on my birthday." Thomas heaved a deep sigh. "Actually, Lauren was recently asked about her family medical history by a doctor. Some abnormality was found during her checkup. Linda, her biological mother, was discovered to have a specific genetic disorder, and Lauren needed to be tested," Margaret added. She sat back on the sofa, showing an exhausted expression. "That meant we'd need to look at family medical records, and there was a risk the truth would come out," Thomas continued. "So we thought we'd just tell Emily about being adopted and consider everything settled. By telling me the truth, you could protect Lauren's secret." Emily gazed coolly at her father. "You didn't care if I got hurt." "That's not it." Thomas weakly shook his head. "I didn't want to lie anymore. You have the right to know the truth, but that should have protected Lauren's secret." "How did you know about it?" Margaret asked Emily. Her eyes reflected question and surprise. "I found it by chance when organizing Mum's desk, but I said nothing until today." "I didn't want to destroy the family's peace," Emily answered. She moved away from the window and stood before her parents. In the end, we were all hiding something. Thomas stood up and tried to approach his daughter. It's not that I don't love you, it's just that we weren't a real family. I was always second because we weren't blood related. Emily interrupted her father. No, Margaret raised her voice. Emily, you were my first child. You're my daughter. Blood doesn't matter. But it did matter, didn't it? To Dad, Emily said quietly. Lauren carried his blood. That's why she was always special. Thomas was at a loss for words. His silence attested to the truth of Emily's words. I'm going back, Emily said with determination. She started toward the stairs but turned back midway. But before I go, there's something I want to say. She slowly approached her parents. Thank you for raising me. You may have lied, but you still accepted me as family. I'll live my own life in Chicago, but… She searched for words for a moment. Find Lauren. She must be confused too. Margaret nodded tearfully. Emily, you truly are a wonderful daughter, so much stronger and wiser than us. Tell that to Lauren too. Emily smiled gently. She must be suffering now, knowing the truth. Emily climbed the stairs and headed to her room. She needed to pack her belongings and prepare to leave this house. Her heart was filled with complex emotions, but she also felt a strange sense of release. Years of questions and anxieties had finally been resolved. She no longer needed to blame herself for not being a biological daughter. Emily took a deep breath. This was a new beginning, the first step in a new life, knowing the truth. 6 months later, Chicago's early summer sunlight brightly illuminated Emily's apartment. Sitting by the window, gazing at her laptop screen, Emily's expression was peaceful. In her inbox was an unread email labeled from Lauren Carter. Her fingers trembled momentarily, but Emily took a deep breath and opened the email. Emily, since that day my life has completely fallen apart. I no longer know who I am, but I'm beginning to understand through counseling. For years, I've envied and hurt you. Maybe it was because I vaguely sensed who I really was. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want to meet and talk with you. The email ended, stating that she planned to visit Chicago this weekend. Emily read the email again with mixed feelings. In her own process of accepting being adopted, she had experienced many conflicts about her identity. Since that day, Emily's relationship with her family had completely changed. Lauren had left home for another apartment and cut ties with her parents. Emily occasionally spoke with Margaret on the phone, but with Thomas, she still couldn't find the courage to exchange words. Emily wrote back, Lauren, thank you for your email. Of course, we can meet. I have things I want to talk about too. 2 weeks later, at a cafe overlooking Lake Michigan in Chicago, Emily and Lauren faced each other calmly for the first time in 5 years. Lauren had lost weight and had dark circles under her eyes. Without her former glamour appearing in her natural state, she looked somehow fragile. I went to meet my biological mother, Lauren said quietly, clutching her tea. Linda was a complicated person, but as soon as she saw me, she burst into tears and apologized. She was a victim too. She believed she was loved by Dad, but in the end, she was abandoned. And you? Emily asked. I've stopped blaming people, especially you. You did nothing wrong. If anything, you were much stronger than me. Tears welled in Lauren's eyes. For years I was jealous, thinking you were loved by our parents. But in reality, neither of us knew the truth, Emily said quietly. I've started looking for my roots too. I haven't found my biological parents yet, but I hope you find them. Lauren smiled slightly. Afterward, the sisters gradually began talking about each other's lives. Lauren had quit her real estate job and started studying to become a counselor. Emily was advancing plans to establish her own accounting consulting firm. How is Mom? Emily asked. She's recovering little by little. She seems to have reconciled with Dad. They've both acknowledged their mistakes and are exploring a new relationship. On Christmas Day, the 4 of them gathered around one table for the first time in a long while. Both parents and Lauren visited Emily's Chicago apartment. It wasn't a perfect relationship, but at least a new bond based on honesty and understanding had begun to grow. Thomas said in his toast, blood ties don't make a family. Love and honesty make a family. We failed at both, but now we've been given another chance to start over. Emily and Lauren met eyes and quietly smiled at each other. Though they had no blood connection, through their shared pain and healing, they were beginning to become sisters in the truest sense. What is a true family? Not merely blood ties, but facing each other without lies, acknowledging each other's mistakes, and still having the determination to walk together. That's what Emily came to understand, and she finally felt that she was truly a family member. Gazing at the sunset sinking into Lake Michigan, Emily thought, perhaps this was the real birthday gift, a new beginning built on truth, free from secrets.